Good evening, folks. We're going to call to order our regular board meeting of the Marin Municipal Water District for the evening of August 1st. Thierry, could we get a roll call?
Yes, good evening. Vice President Ranjiv Kush,
Here.
Director Larry Russell,
Here.
Director Matt Sampson,
Here.
Director Jed Smith,
Here.
and President Monty Schmidt.
Here. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Are there any public comments on items not on the agenda?
Yes, we do have, I'm sorry, on the agenda.
Yeah, on the agenda.
No, not on the agenda.
Okay. Can I get a roll call vote?
Yes. Vice President Kush,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
and President Schmidt.
Aye. Okay. Now, do we have any public comments on items not on the agenda?
Not on the agenda. Yes, we do have one, Mr. Ed Jameson. And if you can please and also then Mimi Willard. And if you can just give me a minute so I can turn on the timer, I would appreciate it. Mr. Jameson, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, thanks. Anything costing over $33,000 an acre foot is very expensive water. Following up on last week's water efficiency meeting, I'd like to highlight two numbers. A cost of $50,000 an acre foot for rain barrels and a cost of $26,000 an acre foot for laundry to landscape. The cost is probably more like $35,000 or $40,000 per acre foot if not everyone actually uses it once the district forces them to install it. An expensive stub out save no water. This is what the district's ill-conceived 2016 gray water ordinance has become. The board cannot defend imposing these kinds of costs on its customers. The ordinance needs to be rescinded. And I'd encourage the board to consider what Director Russell has now said to both the old board and to this new board about non-functional turf. Going after a relatively small 164 acre feet a year may not be worth the cost. And Director Russell questioned public acceptance of this. And other than residential turf, all the other existing conservation programs offer absolutely trivial potential benefits. The board needs to be shown a recap of actual unit participation for the various conservation programs in fiscal year 2023, along with the estimated annual water savings for each program at that participation level, and the cost per acre foot to both the district and to the customer for each program. I believe the board will be surprised at just how little water these programs actually save and that the costs do not justify increased spending on these programs. The board needs to assure that customers' money is being spent responsibly on these conservation programs, and it is clear that the present course is not doing that, particularly for gray water and rain barrels. Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Mimi Willard, please.
Evening. My comments dovetail with Ed's. MMWD expended a lot of its political capital and public trust to gain support for the large 4-year rate increases that were approved by the board in June. And the directors and the district made the case compellingly that this money is needed to put the district back on solid financial ground and to begin to fund projects that increase our water supply and security. That capital, those funds are finite, and they must be prioritized toward the most valuable uses. Each project, large or small, should meet the test, and the test is this the best use of our money? The figures Ed cites suggest that some of the conservation projects don't meet that standard. I think the same appears to be the case for the advanced meter infrastructure proposal. Every project should be carefully scrutinized on its merits and versus the alternatives. The winners should make sense financially while, importantly, minimizing environmental and legal risk. I am confident that you as a board have the skills and the commitments to follow this path and to make the right sets of decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Phil Sauter, please.
Yes, I'd like to make a comment on the fact that the conservation alternative as a water supply alternative, I don't think has been fully developed. I believe that the staff and the board have taken some major steps toward getting conservation and water efficiency to be able to be compared directly with other water supply options. I do think it's important to remember as we go through those options, and this will be a discussion for a future meeting, is that water quality is one of the hallmarks of the Marin Water District, as is the absence of certain, chemicals and PFAS and so on that are in other sources of water supply. I don't think it should be taken off the table with a few comments before a meeting. I think it should be studied as aggressively as staff and the board is planning to study it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay, thank you, Terry.
Mhm.
Okay, directors and general managers announcements. Start on the left here. Larry, do you have anything?
No.
Ranjeev?
No, thanks.
Matt?
Not tonight.
Okay, and I have nothing either, and nothing from you, Ben? Okay,
Jed, all ready to roll.
sorry, Jed. All good? Okay. All right. Okay, with that then, we're going to move on to the consent calendar. Can I get a motion to adopt the consent calendar?
So moved. Second.
Okay, are there any comments on the consent calendar?
There are none.
Okay, could we get a vote, Terry?
Yes. Vice President Kush,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
and President Schmidt.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, that takes us on to our regular calendar, and up front first, we've got our Lagunitas Creek Watershed Enhancement Plan, and that's going to be Sean.
Yeah, good afternoon, directors. Sean Horn, Watershed Resources Manager, and I'm joined with Jonathan Kaler, our Fisheries Manager, and Jason White from Environmental Sciences and Associates, who's our design engineer on the restoration project. So this is an informational item this evening, and we've got a presentation for you that will go through the advancements that we've gotten to with the 65% design of this restoration project. So as you'll recall, the district started this project in 2020 with a grant from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife for about $300,000 to start restoration designs and assessments on the Lagunitas Creek watershed below Kent Lake. So we assessed 4 miles of land on public and private or public lands in Lagunitas Creek and San Geronimo Creek. We identified restoration opportunities through that assessment, and we performed initial biological assessments and cultural resources to understand where we could kind of have the least impact while we were doing this work. So through that process, we identified 13 restoration sites and began advancing those to help inform kind of conversations with our stakeholders. We engaged the Lagunitas TAC through that process, and then we engaged state parks where most of these projects would be occurring. We presented that 30% design at the December 21st Watershed Committee. And since that time, we've been advancing the design to the 65% stage. So we're here this evening to provide you with an update on that and also to advance our CEQA evaluation for the project, which we'll speak to later on in the presentation. So just a reminder, what is this project? It's about restoring habitat within Lagunitas Creek. We're really focusing on 3 listed species: coho salmon, California freshwater shrimp, and steelhead, as well as other aquatic species. There's 13 sites we've got mapped out here on the right-hand side. This would restore 4,450 linear feet of channel at the end of the project. And it would entail installing 278 logs, 12,000 tons of gravel, and creating 9 riffle pool wood structures, 1 tributary confluence modification with riffle pool wood structures, and 3 gravel augmentation sites. And we'll get into detail on what that looks like in our design as we kind of advance through this presentation. The real kind of new or novel approach to restoration that we're doing here is the gravel augmentation. We have not done that in Lagunitas Creek, and it's an exciting kind of advancement in our restoration efforts. So Lagunitas Creek is identified as a priority watershed for recovery of endangered central coast coho salmon. This is a function in part that 55% of the spawning habitat upstream of Kent Lake has been impacted by the dams that we have in the watershed. So we know that dams do a couple of things. They block the input of sediment as well as wood, and that's important for helping to create those spawning habitat and that rearing condition downstream of dams. So we're really looking at reinstalling some of those features into the system to help drive some of those physical and geomorphic processes. So one of the studies that we're really relying on to advance and kind of inform this design is the Stillwater Science Limiting Factors Analysis that was done in 2008. That really identified that there is a lack of wood and gravel in this system, and that is a function of dams within the watershed. So the project is really hoping to kind of target winter and spring rearing habitats through these improvements and hopefully improving conditions that are constrained for coho populations within the system. Another study that's driving kind of our design process is the State Regional Water Quality Control Board. The San Francisco region looked at other coastal range watersheds and identified kind of natural wood loading that would be occurring. For this system in Lagunitas Creek, they made a recommendation that 10 logs per 300 feet would have been kind of a natural loading process. Our fisheries department does large wood surveys within Lagunitas Creek and San Geronimo Creek, and the map on the right kind of identifies what they've been identifying through those surveys. And really, there's only about 30% of the amount of wood that should be in there. And of that 30%, 20 to 50% was put in by past restoration efforts that the district and other agencies have done. So there is a need to increase the kind of density and of wood within the system, and then also address kind of that gravel deficit through these projects. So what do you do? What do you get when you don't have that wood in the system? You get kind of this homogeneous channel, really shallow conditions, long glides, kind of bowling alley. There's not a lot of complexity. There's not a lot of storage of that gravel. So these are the conditions we're trying to change through implementing these restoration efforts in the watershed. Now, to do this, we have to go through CEQA and the environmental review process. Now, the California recently developed a Cutting the Green Tape initiative to really kind of streamline and increase the pace of restoration within California. And we've been working with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to conduct an assessment through this statutory exemption for this restoration project. And they've identified this as being kind of a model project for this exemption process. And so they've worked with us to develop this, and it's been really helpful in not only streamlining the planning effort, but also resulting in some savings to the district of about $200,000 in work that we would have done had we been doing a full-blown CEQA analysis on this project. That is an important step for us to take, and that's what we'll be bringing back to a future board item to take action on, is the notice of exemption to comply with this CEQA process and the concurrence that CDFW has to do. And this will also support the advancement of our project permits for the resource agencies so that we can begin implementation of it. Now, the initial designs that we have been working on up to the 30%, as I mentioned, those were funded through CDFW's Proposition 68 with $300,000 of money. We've been able to implement all of that grant-funded project and close out that grant. And we got a second grant from CDFW for $800,000 to advance phase 1 to the 100% stage. So we're at 65% right now, just for the upper project sites that we've identified in phase 1. We've secured $1.4 million in grant funding for sites 1, 2, and 3, and then $590,000 from the Department of Water Resources for sites 12 and 13. I'll note that those two funding sources are new for the district. We haven't gone after those resources in the past, so that's a great lift to our restoration efforts in the watershed. Now, we also have pending grant applications with CDFW, a $4.6 million grant to help with the implementation of sites 1, 2, and 3, and then also to fund 4, 5, and 6. If we secure that, that would be all of the funding we would need for phase 1 of the project. And then we've got a pending application with CDFW to advance restoration designs in phase 2 for $600,000. So this map here just kind of identifies, when we talk about phase 1 and 2, what we're saying. The highlighted area or the circled area, that's phase 1 of the project. That's right downstream of our, sorry about that. This is right downstream of Peters Dam initially, and then down to Samuel P. Taylor State Park is where you're looking at on this map. And so the next phase of this presentation, I'm going to hand it off to Jonathan, and we're going to go kind of into detail with what these restoration projects are looking like at the 65%. design stage and the benefits that we hope to get from them.
All right, yeah, so you can see there's 8 sites total that we've advanced to the 65% design level, and it really represents a lot of additional wood and gravel to the channel. So this channel really is starving for both of those things, and the idea is to bring it back up to what we hope is a long-term sustainable level, as Sean mentioned. Pretty significant amounts of material going in, like I said, and this really builds on the district's long history of doing work in Lagunitas Creek. So this is not a new approach. It's really just taking what we've done historically, filling in all of the gaps where we weren't able to work previously, and then also increasing just the magnitude of the work, if you will. Right now, where we are in the process, just to put it in context, 65% design is we go 30%, 65, 90, and then 100. So we're more than halfway. There's quite a bit of detail that we'll talk about, but we're definitely still looking for input. And we just actually had a meeting with the Lagunitas TAC today to review these designs, and we've been getting good support from them. They're fully supportive of the approach that we're using. And the approach really consists of 3 primary components. The first of which is adding what we call a riffle forcing structure. And these are designs that ESA has come up with. And the idea is to take these same approaches and then apply them sort of in these various sites throughout the restoration reach. And what a riffle forcing structure is basically 2 big logs coming together and forcing the flow into a central sort of funnel shape. And that does a couple of things. It breaks up those long glides that Sean showed you a picture of and creates riffles. It stores gravel and essentially takes those long, maybe 200, 300, 400 foot units and breaks them up into smaller chunks that are more favorable for fish. The second component is adding cover and then also just diversity within the pools that are created by these riffle forcing structures. So they basically create sort of smaller units, and then within those units, what we do is we add wood on the sides here, and you can see that these are the actual structures here, and those are alternating from side to side, and that makes the water sort of flow sinuously through there and create a little more diversity of hydraulics and food productivity and all of the other things that basically indicate to us that it's good habitat for fish. So we're really trying to find the places in nature that are functioning and copy it as much as possible, and then obviously set it up for nature to take over and keep these things going long term. And then the final component, the third component, is something, as Sean mentioned, hasn't really been done in Lagunitas or really any coastal stream of this size. It's adding gravel. So there's been a lot of gravel deficit since the dams have been put in, and you could put these structures in place without that gravel, but that really is kind of the foundation, that keeps that stream ecosystem going. So really actually enthusiastic about that particular component. The 65% designs have a fair bit of detail. You can actually see the locations of the structures here. It's probably kind of hard to make out at this scale, but this is a site that's about 500 feet long. This is site 6. And these are those riffle forcing structures that we would be placing 3 of those across. So essentially creating, you can kind of think about this long existing flat bed of the channel, not really having any features. And we're creating a series of gradual steps and sort of smaller units that are favorable for fish. And over time, we really hope that fish will choose to spawn in these areas because those are designed to capture the fine gravel that we're putting in. I shouldn't say fine because I don't mean fine small, but fine quality, basically marble to kind of golf ball size material. Shows our access routes. We've been working very closely, obviously, with state parks. Much of this work is done either entirely or partially on state parks property. So there are concerns about redwood trees and other resources that we're working through. So here's just an example of the kind of detail that we have right now that's being reviewed by the agencies and the Lagunitas TAC. One of the more interesting aspects of this work has been what's kind of informed the process, and this is hydraulic modeling, very similar to what we, as the district, did during the TUCP, the Temporary Urgency Change Petition, where we looked at flows in Lagunitas Creek at a very fine resolution. Similar process here, where you can look on the left and see existing conditions. So this is velocity. The model shows velocity, water depth, and then also shear stress on the bed. But what you're looking at here is this kind of light green color just indicates not very good habitat. This is very sort of mediocre to a biologist. You look at what's proposed on the right, and that's a lot more diversity and a lot more slow water habitat. That's where the coho are in the wintertime. So we're taking this very low quality habitat and creating diversity of depth, of velocity, of cover, all of these things that the fish need. And you can see that it's the same approach at these other sites. So this is site 3. It's very redundant perhaps, but also very efficient. So once these designs are in place, we can then apply them to other spots. And again, with the access routes and 1, 2, 3 additional riffles, that's more food production, that's more spawning opportunity. It's all of those things that we're trying to achieve in the creek. This is kind of a detailed diagram just showing what these structures look like. So looking at it from overhead view and in plan view, this would be the flow coming this way. And you can see how the logs just pinch the flow together, accelerate that water, create scour downstream, and also retain gravel on the upstream side. So a fish would be spawning sort of right up, losing my cursor, right up here. And then we get a nice pool forming down below. And the same thing, you can see it here in elevation view. So these are the approaches that have been put forward. These are pretty standard. You can see the logs are actually ballasted with very heavy boulders. There's very shallow bedrock in this area, so we were pretty limited in terms of anchoring methodologies. But each one of these is engineered carefully. Jason has assured us that these are essentially stable to the design flows, and they're more or less independent. So if one does go, it doesn't take the whole structure with it. Which was actually another consideration. This was in our first step here during the 30% design development, was just the consideration of downstream risk. Lagunitas is actually a great creek to work in terms of infrastructure. It's on state parks property. It has very little built up around the actual channel. So we're not very constrained, but there are bridges. There are 9 of them. And we've taken some fairly detailed measurements of lengths, widths, heights, and then sized the material appropriately. And these are diagrams on the left just showing how material has the potential to rack up on bridges. The one bridge that we did identify and we've been talking with state parks about is the Camp Taylor Bridge. It's still a big wide opening, so it does not appear to be a major pinch point, but it is the one that did rise to the top of the assessment in terms of risk. So this is the goal. These are actually structures that the district has already put in and are performing really well. And we're trying to just duplicate, emulate, and do it again more frequently. And you can see that complexity. This is where, when we go out and do our fish surveys, this is where we find fish. And we want to keep that trend going. So that's what we're looking to do.
Good deal. And so for schedule for this project, we are at 65% design. We hope to be going to construction next summer. We are on schedule to achieve that goal. We've got funding set up to help us initially start implementation. We're working closely with state parks to consider how we want to implement this project. And we're giving a lot of kind of authority over to them as the collaborator to tell us how much disruption they want to see on a given year. And so this may be a 2 or 3 year construction project, depending on how they want us to phase it. So that's a kind of ongoing conversation that we're having. We've been very successful getting grant funding for this project, and we anticipate continuing to be. So we are going after all the funding pots that we see available to advance this work. We have to kind of consider and keep in mind the time frame for us to spend that money. And so we're paying a lot of attention to kind of when is the right time to ask for the next funding allotment for this project. There's also some really interesting gravel augmentation monitoring work in our DWR grant that if we got funded for. So that will be part of our implementation, is actually doing some monitoring of the augmentation approach to see how functional that is. And ESA is helping us develop kind of a monitoring methodology and plan to guide that. So with that, tonight is just an informational item. We've provided the 65% designs as an attachment to the staff report. At a future board meeting, we'll be bringing an item back to approve the notice of exemption so that we can continue to advance our permitting process through this project. So with that, we'll take any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean. I know we had talked about this project more than a year ago, but we have several new members, and so it's great that we're getting a chance to revisit this. Director's comments, Larry?
We had one of these structures wash out from a previous design. Have we addressed those problems in this one to make sure that doesn't happen again?
You want to take that, or you want me to? You were here. So this project is a different approach than that we're taking from the previous project. That the implementation of that project and how it was done didn't meet some of the design standards, and that was part of the reason of some of the failures. So that'll be addressed through kind of more on the ground monitoring of the construction phases to ensure that we achieve kind of the designs that ESA is putting out. And we've done a tremendous amount of assessment as part of the hydraulic modeling to ensure that the structures we're putting in are stable. We do anticipate some movement of some structures in some cases, but we've designed them to be stable. And we will not see the same type of failure because they are functionally different structures as well.
Okay. We'll see.
I think it's worth noting, in nature, wood does move around. So when something washes out while we build it to try to stay in place, oftentimes that wood will just move downstream and become habitat somewhere else. So and it's a challenge because we have to design things with pieces of wood that will pass through our bridges, and that if we could use bigger, heavier things, then things would stay in place. So we have kind of a design limitation that's inherent to our Lagunitas Creek. Ranji?
Thank you, Monty. Thanks a lot for the presentation. I've wanted to ask about two items. So first are grants, and second is measuring success. So on grants, it's pretty striking, at least to me. I'm somebody who writes a lot of grants, but doesn't have nearly the success rate it seems that we're having, at least with this project. Is it because we're just really good at it, or is funding for this type of work also becoming more readily available, or is this a high profile project for the state and other funders?
I'd like to just claim the first part of that.
Yeah,
But,
that's I'm guessing. Yeah.
yeah, we are in a priority watershed. So this is an area that the state wants to invest in, and we are, a willing partner of the state to do that work. And so that is in part why we're being successful in our grant funding. At the federal level, though, I think that's new. U.S. Bureau of Reclamation hasn't funded this kind of work in Marin County, as far as I know. And so that is a new funding source for us. And that's kind of us reaching out and going beyond kind of what's just the obvious grant funding stream.
Great. Yeah, that's encouraging,
Yeah.
Sean. That's good to hear.
Do you want to speak to the second part?
Maybe if I could just elaborate though on that,
Yeah.
on success of the project, because I'm sure in all the application, one really, I think beneficial part about grants, in addition to having that external funding sources, it forces us to be very rigorous in what we propose to do, and it receives a lot of external vetting. So you're being vetted by much more than this 5-person board, which I think contributes a lot to the success of these types of projects. So I'm sure you have a lot of indicators for success. I'm sure fish numbers are high up there. Is there any strategy or any options, or have you ever are there considerations for how to do comparisons between areas that you're restoring and areas that maybe you're not restoring at the same rate? I don't know if that's, or other similar creeks that are not receiving the same levels of intervention to see how much of success you can attribute to the actual interventions. Or if we're not seeing as much success as we might expect, if that, that would help identify other things such as water quality, water temperature that might also be playing a role in fish numbers. I would imagine the knowledge and learning component of what you're doing could be really beneficial for broader restoration efforts and collaborations, even with groups that would be willing to do those types of studies to help learn from this effort may be an option too. But it'd be great to hear how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, so you've hit the nail on the head, and you're thinking very much like a scientist, like we are too. It is an unusual opportunity to do a lot of interesting comparisons between sites where we have restoration and where we don't. So that is very much in the works. We have a fairly elaborate monitoring plan that's being developed in collaboration with, the agencies and other folks who think about this. So measuring fish numbers is one component, but just is the structure functioning in the way that it was intended to function? Is it creating depth in the way that Jason and his team intended it to? And these velocities, when we actually go out and measure them, do they validate the model, or do they do something completely different? So yeah, this is very much an opportunity to do all of those things, and it is something we're actively actually putting in staffing requests in our grant proposals as well to get the sort of person power to support that. And yeah, we've heard the same thing from the Lagunitas TAC today, where this is an opportunity. This type of work has certainly been done other places, but Lagunitas Creek is also in a very unique position where we have this tremendous long-term data set. We have been doing really excellent monitoring for years. In fact, Eric Etlinger, our aquatic biologist or aquatic ecologist, has done really, really high quality restoration monitoring for the structures we've already installed, just going out and mapping sort of how the channel has changed around these structures. Then, of course, are fish there, how many fish, what types of fish, all of those kinds of data. So yeah, we are definitely on board with that and in agreement.
And maybe if we could, Jason, do you want to just kind of speak to what we learned from assessing our previous restoration structures and then how that's kind of informed our current design, just briefly?
You read my mind. So yeah, the first question that got brought up about the past wood structures, that is something that we did as part of the original enhancement plan. Was we went through and worked with Eric and did kind of a post-mortem, like what's going on with all the wood that you've put in there. There's been several decades of installation of these wood structures. So we took that information, we incorporated it into this whole design approach that we're putting forward. And then on top of that, we did bring in the latest state of the science, where we're using these two-dimensional hydraulic models. We're using the Bureau Rec, ironically, their guidance on how to engineer these wood structures. There's a lot of different forces that we look at, and that's informed by the hydraulic modeling that we do. And so there's a lot of detailed engineering and design that went into these structures, so that not only will they, when they go in, they're going to provide great habitat, but they will continue to function over time, so that function will be there, it'll be resilient. And that's a big focus of what we try to accomplish with the design.
Yeah, thanks. And I would just note that one of the slides in the presentation was a map that Eric made of the large wood that we see in the creek, right? And we hope to see all those red dots kind of turn green, because we've got that loading that the State Water Board had identified. So 10 logs per 300 feet, right? And see what changes that drives.
Just thanks a lot. I think, we've all been reading about the removal of dams on the Klamath River and how quickly it seems that, or I guess evidence from other rivers that seem to be improving very rapidly after those types of changes. If we can document the same thing, the signs look positive for documenting the same thing here. We need some environmental success stories for sure. I hope that you'll be presenting these, the results at conferences, writing them up as technical papers. It could add a lot of value to the research community broadly. So thanks a lot.
And to echo the comments and the thank you for this, and also for the continued effort to find external funding. And then also to tell our story, especially with the new communications piece about the watershed fishery. So great job getting the word out on that. And also, thank you very much for including and continue to include the Lagunitas TAC. I had the opportunity to take the field trip to see some of those sites earlier this year, and it was really a good thing to see everybody have their buy-in and support because they're able to contribute their comments and their thoughts of it. It really felt like a group effort. So a great feel-good story on that piece as well. And also for the quality of work that's gone in so far, to actually see and from an untrained eye, not understand that that log was placed unnaturally until you see the small piece of rebar go through and then indicate it. So quality project as well. But one of the things I'm curious about, and not for response tonight unless you're able to, is with this restoration work, would this, I guess, have any effect on water rights? Should we end up changing any dam heights down the road? It'd be interesting to look into see if we could be able to have any effect on that as we move towards the larger water project. But thank you for the update.
I'll just add a few things. I mean, foremost, like the program that we have here, I know we are a water district, and that's what we focus a lot of our time and attention on. In the river and fisheries management world, MMWD is seen as a real leader in our work that we are doing in Lagunitas Creek. And so huge kudos to our fisheries team, because it is recognized within that professional sphere as being really an incredible effort, longstanding, a lot of great work, a lot of innovation, a lot of great data that is really helping to inform other restoration efforts, because it's not a simple science. It's not just, just put the wood in, the fish come right back. There's a lot of other moving parts to a functioning ecosystem, riverine ecosystem. I think a metric of success that's very challenging to use sometimes is population numbers, because there's a lot of reasons why fish populations will vary because of ocean conditions and many other climatic things. But our fisheries numbers have been going up while others have been going down for coho, and that's really, really encouraging. And it is undoubtedly a result of our work on some level, and because that's just being able to count fish. Sometimes you put these structures in and you don't see fish numbers change, again, for a variety of different reasons, but we are seeing, I think, that signal. I want to just say that I think it's really exciting that we're going to be doing a lot of monitoring around this. This is really an opportunity to learn, again, in ways that can be sharing that information with others, presenting at conferences. There are fisheries conferences that I'd love to see us present at. There's a Salmon and Restoration Federation conference that's going to be in Santa Rosa next spring. So I could imagine maybe even field trips. There's a couple of days of field trips. Maybe we can host some. But I'm curious about how we are monitoring for changing climate conditions. And I know that the limiting factors analysis from 2008, it's 15 years old. We've seen a lot of things or learned a lot of things, and our climate projections have definitely shifted, unfortunately, for the worse in terms of increased temperatures and increased peak hydrology, which we've been reading a lot about lately. I'm wondering, to what extent do we need to, I know a lot of our hydraulic models, I'm sure probably use more recent hydraulic analyses, but I'm wondering to what extent maybe our limiting factors analysis might need to be updated at some point in the not too distant future to make sure that we're taking into account our shifting conditions. I wonder if you could, any of you could speak to that.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I agree. It's difficult to pinpoint one effect from climate change. I will say we have upped the number of temperature loggers in Lagunitas Creek. So I think the resolution of the data we're collecting now is better than ever. We now have 4 good temperature monitoring sites in the watershed. We also have a water quality monitoring site in lower Lagunitas. But again, the change is so slow and incremental. It's often difficult to sort of capture that signal. So I would certainly be open to exploring a re-examination of limiting factors if that's something that was of interest. but it's again, I usually defer to the fish, and if the fish are telling us something, I think that's the biggest indicator, maybe the most useful. And then if you see signs of stress or decline, then you start to kind of try to piece about, why that's happening. So I guess in Lagunitas Creek, I mean, I will say the dams are a double-edged sword. They've taken away habitat. They've reduced the amount of wood and gravel delivered to the system, but they very much provide a cold water year-round rearing habitat that's exceptional. That's another reason why Lagunitas is exceptional on the coast. There just aren't that many cold water fisheries in August, September, and they don't go dry. So we're maintaining 6 or 8 CFS when other streams are at half a CFS, 0 CFS. So there very much is that, like I said, it's a double-edged sword. We have our dams, and we can't ignore the impacts they have, but we also probably shouldn't ignore the benefits that they potentially have from that cold water pool.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments?
Yeah, hey guys, thank you for the presentation. I want to build on what Ranjiv and I think where Monty were going, to have a bit more of a data approach and scientific numbers analysis to our efforts. From everything that I hear, and from the last presentation that we heard, the coho salmon rebound in Lagunitas Creek was exceptional, with not necessarily clear understanding of why. And what we saw at Sonoma in their WAC presentation several months ago, they weren't as good as ours. So how do we tie together our efforts with success? How do we prove that we're doing enough? How do we prove that what we are doing is effective and responsible? Are we ahead or behind in this restoration effort? I mean, the sense is that we're doing really well. I gather from what I hear is that this is the best coho habitat in the North Coast on Lagunitas Creek. If that's the case, which I think it is, then we should tout it. The beginning of your presentation should be all about how well we're doing, the numbers behind it, as you showed, I think it was 6 months ago, and continue to show our proven successes. But also, I think it's important to think about how far ahead or behind are we? As Bill McKibben, the professor at Middlebury College, and other scientists showed us in 350.org and how much carbon goes into our atmosphere, that the impact of global warming, of climate warming on our planet would be astonishing, right? So there is science behind where we can lead to better decisions. And I am a bit unsure how far ahead or behind we are. Why are we doing well? Are we doing well? Can we do more? Right? Can we step it up? What if we're not doing enough? What if these grants don't come through? So it would, I think, and maybe because we're new on this board, but I haven't seen it yet in looking at the previous board meetings, a bit more of a data numbers approach than a graphic approach to how logs look on a river, which is very cool, and I get it and I understand that, but let's look at the numbers. Let's look at the impact of what we're doing. Let's look at how other people and other creeks have been successful with other approaches like we're considering. And let's think about whether we are at points of no return, or we're at a turning point, or we're actually on the way. Is phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, is our timing right? And maybe come back to us with ways that we can be helpful to either invest more or to know that we're doing well and take credit for it.
Yeah, thanks for the comments. I'll just note the district has got a Lagunitas stewardship plan that we've developed that has our monitoring program outlined. It's a very robust monitoring program. We're in the process of updating that. So we'll do a future presentation that really gets into the numbers and the data that goes into that monitoring effort. I would say that this Lagunitas Creek restoration project that we're currently designing and developing, ESA has driven us to a new standard, I would say. Our past restoration was very focused on a log and a site. This is a comprehensive kind of reach-wide approach to restoration that we've never done. So this scale hasn't been done in Lagunitas Creek, and we've never done this gravel augmentation. That gravel augmentation is going to have a signal and a response that we have not been able to monitor yet. So that'll be a new kind of process that will take time to understand the benefits of. So appreciate the comment, and I think you will kind of see the depth of monitoring that goes on when we present the updated Lagunitas stewardship plan and the input that we've gotten from the Lagunitas TAC on developing that.
Yeah, all the more, like if someone else has said this new approach that we are considering is a good one, then it'd be good to report why, so that we see it.
And I also just want to echo to your point about bringing in seeking funding to make sure we have the capacity to monitor this. This is kind of such an important moment to start monitoring and being ahead of it so that we have before and after. And so if for some reason we don't get funding for that, I would hope that we come back either in the watershed committee or to the board, and we'd figure out how to make sure that we don't miss that opportunity, because this is really a time for us to capture something that we're doing that's really changing the game. And it would be really great to be able to show that our investment is generating the kind of ecological returns that we would like to see. So thank you for all the great work you guys are doing.
Yeah, we'll just clarify that DWR grant that we mentioned, that is secured, and so that monitoring will occur.
Great, thank you.
We do have one public comment.
Okay.
Mr. Phil Sauter.
Yeah, excuse me. I appreciated Director Cush's question as to why we're so successful. I think that Sean was somewhat modest in his answer. I've watched this process over a decade or two, and the things I've noticed are that the district has a long-term vision, has built cooperative relationships. It brings expertise, credibility, and leadership, and has leveraged funds considerably, especially since Matt has turned bi-coastal, and we've delivered results. The district is constantly vetted through the Lagunitas Creek Technical Advisory Committee. I know that President Schmidt and Director Sansom make it a point to spend time with the TAC and have been on several field trips. I think that the Brown Act may limit participation to 2 directors at a time, so taking turns is an option. And I also believe that a publicly noticed meeting is also an option if more directors want to attend. Finally, if we want a goal, I'll suggest getting our coho salmon off the endangered species list. That would have brought a lot of laughs a year ago, but now I'm not so sure we won't make it.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, that moves us on to our next agenda item, which is the Marin County Grand Jury Report Response on Accessory Dwelling Units.
Hi, good evening, directors. I'm Alex Anaya, the Design Engineering Manager, today sitting in for Crystal. This evening, I have Joseph Ishins, who's the Engineering Support Service Manager, who's going to be providing a informational PowerPoint update on accessory dwelling units.
Good evening, everybody. Good to see you. I'd like to begin our presentation noting that I should not be considered an expert on the subject of accessory dwelling units. My presentation tonight is the application of District Code 2 accessory dwelling units. I'm happy to take any questions that is spawned by the no pun intended, spawned by the presentation, and get back to you with answers regarding accessory dwelling units in particular. Thank you. All right, appreciate that. Where we got our start. Here. Oh, that's the old one. Sorry about that. Where am I going now?
Slide up on top. Slideshow. Up on top.
I'm sorry, I'm not seeing it.
Oh.
Yeah, it's fine. It's okay.
Yeah.
Mhm. There you go.
Thank you very much. So I'm presenting a summary of district code relating to accessory dwelling units. And let's dive right in. What we come up with when the subject of accessory dwelling units comes up is 2 big questions. Question number 1, does the district require a separate meter for new ADUs? And question number 2, does the district require payment of a connection fee for new ADUs? So this directs us right into district code. Requirements for water service are found in Title 11 of our code. So we want to answer those two questions. And so we're going to start with definitions and general conditions for water service. We'll take a peek at that right now. So when we look at this part of the code, we're going to see that no meter will be set and no service given for the service or metering of more than one living unit, commercial unit, or agricultural industrial enterprise. Now I see that big however there. I would ask you to put that in your shirt pocket. We'll come back to that in a second. What we want to focus on here in this part of the code is that specifically related to ADUs is that each living unit must be served by a separate meter. So an ADU, of course, accessory dwelling unit, is a type of living unit. So that's going to beg the question, well, what is the definition of a living unit? And if we delve further into the code, that same section, we get a little definition here. If we look at the middle of the screen there, capital letter E, we can see that code provides us with a living unit is defined as a structure containing a kitchen or electrical wiring and or plumbing for potential use of a kitchen. So that helps us qualify what we're talking about, right? An accessory dwelling unit has that definition. And so with the code, we're referencing the code in terms of that definition and how it applies to the ADUs. Now I'm going to ask you to go ahead and come back to the however. We can go ahead and pull that out of our pocket now and look at each living unit to have a meter. However, the following facilities will be allowed to be served by a common meter upon the receipt of a written request from the applicant. So for example, if we look at capital letter A duplex, apartment, or other multiple unit residential structure in undivided ownership may be served by a common meter. An apartment building, a multiple unit residential structure in undivided ownership. Now that could be a single family residence with an attached ADU. So therefore not required to be metered separately, that ADU. So we can jump down to capital letter F. We see each living unit to have its own meter served by a common meter, except for a junior accessory dwelling unit known as a JDU, or an ADU meeting the criteria set forth in the section 11.56.040. So let's do a quick summary before we move on, because there's a lot of information here and it's coming at you fast and furious, right? I don't have pretty pictures in my presentation, unfortunately. What we know so far is that each living unit is required to have its own meter. An ADU is considered a living unit, but the code does allow, as we see here, section 11.56.040, for an alternative approach. So as we point to that section of the code, that will also help us answer our biggest question number 2, if you remember what that was, and that is, does the district require payment of a connection fee for a new ADU? So let's dive into that section of the code. Connection fees. This comes with a little reminder about the fact that a connection fee is established for the privilege of using the district's potable and recycled water system. So a little reminder where we're getting the connection fee. And it refers us directly here to subsection H, specifically in relationship to ADU. So bear with me here. We're going to take a look at that right now. Now, this one is scary. I know the PowerPoint rules. I'm breaking them right now. A big hunk of text on a slide. I'm as scared as you are. But I really found this very important in explaining what the next part of the code is and directing us to the definitions and requirements for ADUs. So let's look at this, and I'm going to go ahead and read this. A new or separate water service shall not be required, and no connection fee shall be charged for one junior accessory dwelling unit, also called JDU, or one ADU per lot with a proposed or existing single-family dwelling, if the JDU meets the requirements in subsection 1, or the ADU meets the requirements set forth in subsections 2 or 3. So boy, there's a mouthful, right? But this is pointing us firmly in the direction, where do we go to find these requirements, to define them and determine how to answer those two questions. So let's jump right in with subsection 1, where we can talk about what's a JDU. A JDU is a type of ADU that has no more than 500 square feet. It's contained entirely within a single family residence. It's got an efficiency kitchen, so we're talking about a bar sink, microwave oven, a hot plate. As a requirement for a restrictive covenant that the owner occupy the premise. And the code does mirror the state definition of the JDU. So that's important because it means if the local jurisdiction is classifying that as a JDU, we know that our code is the same. So therefore, for JDUs, a separate meter is not required and no connection fee is due. So now we can look at the second type of ADU there, and that would be an ADU contained within an existing structure. So for these types of ADUs that are contained within an existing single-family residence or an existing structure, the best way to look at that is a conversion of existing space. So consider a garage. Turn your garage into another new living unit. The second floor, you have a 2-story home, you convert the top floor into a separate living unit. So those are examples of that. These types of ADUs also need to be located on a lot with an existing primary residence. They have to have complete independent living facilities. These types of ADUs may include an expansion of no more than 150 square feet for ingress or egress. So consider that maybe you got to make a separate entryway. A covered stairway if it's on the second floor. You can add that in and still qualify here. So these types of attached ADUs, the total area shall not exceed 50% of the existing primary dwelling, and for detached ADUs, the total area shall not exceed 1,200 square feet. Again, a lot to digest here, but the summary is, when we're talking about a conversion of existing space, no separate meter is required and no connection fee due. And this is actually state law. This is in compliance with state law that prohibits the district from the separate metering or charging of a connection fee for this type of ADU. So now let's take a look at the next type. Our next type of ADU here is newly constructed ADUs. So newly constructed attached ADUs, this type will allow expansion beyond 150 square feet. And for attached ADUs, still shall not exceed 50% of the existing primary dwelling. For this type of detached ADU, must have complete independent living facilities on the same lot as the existing primary dwelling. And detached ADUs shall not exceed 1,200 square feet. So additionally, we do have an additionally here, ADUs described in this section shall be subject to conditions A, B, and C. And you guys are so excited because I get to do another slide with text. That's exactly right. We got to look at conditions A, B, and C as well, because those are applicable to this type of ADU, the newly constructed type. So capital letter A, either the ADU or single family dwelling shall be owner occupied. Both the existing single family dwelling and the ADU shall comply at minimum with water efficiency standards from our Title 13. And the applicant shall be a current district customer who has continuously maintained water service at the parcel which the ADU will be constructed for a period of at least 1 year immediately preceding submission of an application for the waivers set forth in this section. All right, let's all take a deep breath and we can say, all right, we've been through a bunch of sections now on this type of ADU, the newly constructed type. What does it all mean? Okay, newly constructed ADUs meeting the above conditions qualify to waive the requirement of a separate meter and payment of a connection fee. So where are we then? What was our goal in this presentation? It was try to help to answer those two big questions. The question number one, do we require a separate new meter for new ADUs? Well, for attached ADUs and JDUs, never. We do not require separate metering of attached ADUs or JDUs. Do we require separate meters for detached ADUs? Yes, we do, for newly constructed, for the type of ADU that's newly constructed and that does not meet the conditions of that applicable code section. Another way to say that is that do not qualify for the waiver. The A, B, and C section of that code. So then we come to question number 2. How about, does the district require a payment of connection fee for new ADUs? Well, the type of ADUs converted from existing space, no. For those that meet the conditions of the applicable code section, which in fact is parallel with the state law. So the last type of ADU we can look at here, do we need to pay a connection fee for? That's newly constructed ADUs. Do we need pay a connection fee for those? Does the customer? Yes. For those that do not meet the conditions of the applicable code section, again, a better way to say that is for ones that don't qualify for the waiver. So I know that's a lot of information. Whoops, that's a lot of information and came pretty quickly. But you know, the ADU has been the ADU laws have been dynamic, as we've seen since about 2016. The district, in fact, goes above and beyond what state law requires. The waiver program in particular. And over the past 7 years or so, it has become more common for no connection fees applicable or meter installation requirements for the average ADU, because people, of course, are looking at the guidelines and building them accordingly. So I'm going to go ahead and conclude the presentation. What I'd like to do is give some kudos to our engineering technicians in the development services area who have to talk about this with our customers every single day and explain these requirements. And with that, I can open up to any questions.
And before Mr. Isons does that, I would want to also add on, which is in the staff report, the fact that we're talking about this because of a recent grand jury report to which the district will be responding. And so we'll be bringing forward a draft response for the board. We only have a couple of pieces of that report that we need to respond to, but this will give us really good context for that draft document that we'll be bringing forward in the future. And we did in the staff report identify the penal code sections that are applicable to grand jury responses. So I'm happy to help with questions on that piece if there are any. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. Okay, board comments. We'll start to the right. Matt? Sanjeev?
Joseph, thanks a lot. I'm not sure that I captured everything, but I think I understand, from what I gathered, it seems like a good percentage of what's being constructed is going to fall under one of the waivers. And as you've noted, a lot of the new construction is seeking to comply with those waivers. The code itself, can you just say, do you know, or can you say something about how the code is developed and whether there's ever occasion to update our codes? What does that process involve?
Certainly, the changes in the state law, this part of the code related to connection fees and the waiver program is a new addition. We do that by ordinance, I believe. So when these, how dynamic these have been, we have to be on our toes if the state changes a law to make sure we're in compliance. So we want to do that, and we do that by ordinance to change the code and update it so it at least matches what we're required to do.
And so the state law did, as Joseph said, change a lot since 2016 with respect to the requirements for ADUs, specifically to try to help address the affordable housing shortage, additional housing needs. And so municipalities and special districts like ours were really required to evaluate that and react. And there were intentional components of our district code that were adopted by the board. There were some, deviations, as you heard, from what the requirements of state law were, some that were following state law specifically and some that were going a little bit further in trying to assist the development of ADUs. So that's all in our code, and it is changed by ordinance when necessary or desired.
Great, thanks. And Molly, could you just say a little bit about the grand jury report? We've heard about the grand jury report related to dam safety, but I'm not familiar with this one.
Yeah, the grand jury report on this particular topic really was focused on the different layers of complexity that apply to accessory dwelling units, because state law doesn't, as you see, we've chosen to go further than state law requirements. Not all special districts have followed suit. So there are a lot of different rules that apply. They're quite complex. There's a lot of different definitions. The state law rules themselves are quite complex, and I've been through them. You need to read it probably 3 or 4 times before you really have a sense of them. So I think the grand jury report is really focused on the complexities sometimes that become barriers, and seeking some responses from the different number of municipalities and districts on those issues that are raised in that report.
Thank you.
Larry?
I have a couple questions. What is the definition of attached?
The definition of attached, sharing a common wall or roof. So you could have we usually would rely on the local jurisdiction's definition through the building code, but that would be what I would provide to you as an answer to that question.
And the next question is, it says in some of those, the owner has to be there for the resident. How long do they have to reside?
There's no limitation on that particular aspect.
So they could do 1 day?
Our question, they answered the question whether or not they will reside on the property. We do not have a time limit established for that under the current code.
Interesting. Okay.
Jed?
No, thank you for your attention and bringing this up for us. Without a doubt, I am, speaking for myself, not necessarily for the district, super focused on affordable housing and seeing how we can better support the neediest in our population. And so your outline here has been helpful, and I look forward to the next steps.
I have another question.
Okay.
These things are small, 1,000 square feet. Do we have a special category for them in terms of connection fees? Because obviously they're not going to have water, and they're, for outside uses, and they're not going to have substantial water use inside, one would think.
We did our last connection fee study. We've identified and assigned annual allotments based on size and whether it's attached or detached. So there are specific categories with specific allotments associated with those. The most common allotment for an ADU is 0.08 acre feet as an annual estimate of water use.
So that's pretty small.
That's pretty small.
And what connection fee does that result in?
Dollar amount, you're probably looking about $2,500.
Okay, so it's what I'm after is what Jed was talking about is, that we don't build barriers so high
Mhm.
that it just becomes impractical. Now, obviously, you've got to connect to the main to hook up the lateral.
Well, if you're installing a separate connection, a separate district meter, yes, there'll be a separate dedicated line from the water main in the street. For the attached ADUs, of course, they just connect into the house
Yeah,
piping
of course.
as long as the meter size is adequate.
Any idea, Joseph, what the average cost of that kind of connection is?
The street connects, the district side of the connection is about $7,000 plus paving, plus final paving.
And they get caught in the same paving issues we do?
Absolutely. Yes, the customer is subject to the encroachment permit requirements to restore the road.
So it could be 20 grand, 30 grand.
It is possible. You know, we've seen with the universal paving standard, you know, sometimes that's 20 feet either side, center line of that trench, curb to curb or edge to edge. That can be a lot. We do see, you know, that the requirements for the encroachment permit can vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction and project type to project type.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Great. Well, I did read the grand jury report quickly, and the main point was to try to make these kinds of things easier for people to do. And I would say your presentation, while you did violate PowerPoint rules by having big blocks of text, I found it easy to follow. You got to go slow, but it's the detail is enough there, and I think I appreciate the work that you guys are doing to help people who call and try to figure this stuff out. So
Thank you.
Thank you very
I
much.
have one more quick one. What's PG&E doing?
I don't really have any information on PG&E. I do hear a lot about them requiring a separate meter installation.
So similar, huh?
I don't know any program that they have to reduce fees or waive requirements. I don't have that information.
public comment?
Yes, Mr. Ed Jamison, please.
Yes, thanks. I believe separate meters are highly desirable to encourage conservation, even if no fee is collected by the district. The key question for me is whether waivers under A, B, and C are MMWD ordinances and could be revoked, or are these waivers that are required by state law? Thanks.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay, with that, future meeting schedules.
Yes, good evening. I don't want the timer to go off on me. Okay, yes, so our next board meeting is August 15th. There will be a closed session afterwards. And then the following day is the Communications and Water Efficiency Committee quarterly meeting. And that same week on Friday, there's the Operation Committee meeting. In terms of external meetings, the NBWA meeting is this Friday. It's both Zoom and in person at the Napa Sanitation District at 9:30 a.m. And then this coming Monday, August 7th, is the Sonoma WACTAC meeting in person in Santa Rosa at 9 a.m. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Terry. Okay, with that, we are going to be moving to a closed session, and we will return when we get back.
I just wanted to check with our secretary if there were any
Yeah,
public comments
thank
on
you,
the
yeah.
closed session.
There are none.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Good evening. So the board has reconvened from closed session at 8:40 p.m. with no reportable actions. And with that, we are adjourned. Have a good evening.
Thank you.